You can't just keep ignoring this. Cassian, please, tell me I'm wrong.
Everyone believed the marriage between two alphas would fail. They were wrong. A penthouse, 30 floors above a city finally at peace. The lights are dim, warm instead of cold this time. The same room, the same table, but nothing else the same. A folder rests between two hands that once, in another version of this story, nearly signed it. Cassian picks it up, doesn't hesitate, doesn't sign it either. He tears it in half, then in half again, the sound quiet and final. Paper falling in soft pieces across the table like something finally, permanently laid to rest. I don't need it anymore, he says. I never actually would have used it. Across from him, Darian Liu only smiles. The real one. The one that took 6 months and 100 small, quiet choices to earn. Good, he says. Because I was never signing my half anyway. Piano swells softly, then fades to near silence. The letter arrives on an unremarkable Thursday, delivered by courier to the Liu Foundation's private office, addressed to Darian by name, in handwriting he doesn't recognize. Inside is a single photograph and 3 lines of text. Your mother knew the truth. She died before anyone would let her say it. Ask Chen Wei-ling what really happened 20 years ago. Ask her why she still works for the Wei family. Welcome back to episode 3 of the Alpha Contract. If this is your first time here, I go back and watch episodes 1 and 2 first, because everything that's about to unravel has been quietly building since the very beginning. Darian stares at the photograph for a long time. 2 men, young, standing outside a factory gate. One of them unmistakably a younger version of Cassian's grandfather. The other, he doesn't recognize at all. He doesn't call Cassian immediately. He isn't ready to bring this into their home yet. Not until he understands what it actually is. Chen Wei-ling turns out to be easier to find than he expects. She's the Wei family's longtime executive assistant, a woman who has quietly run the machinery behind 3 generations of Wei men without her name ever appearing on a single public document. She agrees to meet him at a tea house on the edge of the city, somewhere neither family would think to look. She is smaller than he expected and far more tired. I wondered when someone would finally ask, she says before he's even sat down. Ask what? About the merger. About what actually happened to the Liu family's original factory contracts 20 years ago. She wraps both hands around her tea, not drinking it. Everyone believes the Wei family stole those contracts from the Liu Foundation. Your family has believed it for 2 decades. It's the story everyone tells. Isn't it true? It's half true, which is worse than a lie, in some ways, because half-truths are so much harder to undo. She finally meets his eyes. The Wei family didn't steal those contracts. They were sold by your grandfather, willingly, quietly, for a price large enough that no one in your family ever had to ask where the money came from. Darian goes very still. That's not possible. My grandfather built the foundation from nothing. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows the story he wanted told. Chen's voice is gentle, almost apologetic, as if she's known this moment was coming for 20 years and still isn't ready for it. There was a third man involved, a business partner to both families, back when the Wei and Liu households still trusted each other completely. He orchestrated the entire sale. Convinced your grandfather it was the only way to save the foundation from a debt crisis no one else knew about, and convinced the Wei elders it was a mercy, a way to help a struggling ally, without publicly humiliating them. Who was he? Chun hesitates for the first time. A man named Jang Han. He was very close to both families once. Close enough that no one thought to question him. Where is he now? That, Chun says quietly, is the question I would be very careful asking. Because the last 20 years of silence between your families, the story everyone believes, the anger neither family has ever let go of, none of it happened by accident. Someone benefited greatly from the Wei and Liu families never speaking to each other again. And it wasn't either of your grandfathers. If you're piecing this mystery together right along with Darian, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because this story is only getting more tangled from here, and you won't want to miss where it goes next. Darian leaves the tea house with more questions than he arrived with, and one name burned into his memory that he knows, somehow, is going to change everything. He doesn't go home that night. He goes to find Jang Han. Jang Han is not a hard man to find. That in itself unsettles Darian more than if he'd had to search for weeks. A man capable of quietly reshaping two families' entire history shouldn't be reachable through a simple business registry search and a phone call to his office. He runs an investment consultancy now, small and unremarkable on paper, the kind of firm that exists to manage other people's money quietly and never draw attention to how well it's done. Darian requests a meeting under a false pretense, a potential donor for the foundation, and Jang Han agrees without hesitation, which tells Darian either that the man has nothing to hide or that he's supremely confident nothing can touch him regardless. The office is spare, elegant, deliberately unmemorable. Jang Han himself is unremarkable too. At first glance, mid-60s, silver-haired, the kind of face that photographs badly and disappears into a crowd easily. It's only when he speaks that Darian understands why two powerful families once trusted him completely. Dr. Liu. He doesn't look surprised. I wondered how long it would take. You know who I am. I've known who you were since the day you were born. Jang Han gestures to a chair, unbothered, almost warm. Your mother used to bring you to the Foundation's Lunar New Year gatherings. You were a very serious child. Very little has changed. Chun Wei Ling told me what you did. Something flickers across Jang Han's face. Not fear, not quite. Something closer to mild disappointment, like a man watching a long, carefully maintained project finally begin to unravel. Chun was always too sentimental for her own good. He folds his hands on the desk. I assume she told you I orchestrated the sale of your grandfather's contracts. She said you convinced both families it was necessary, that you manufactured a crisis to force it. I didn't manufacture anything, Dr. Liu. I simply understood something both families were too proud to admit, that they were far more valuable to each other apart than together. Two dynasties, competing quietly for the same influence, the same government contacts, the same prestige. United, they would have eventually devoured each other from the inside, the way powerful families always do. Divided, cautious of each other, resentful, they thrived. Separately, safely, you destroyed a friendship to protect them from themselves. Is that really what you're telling me? I'm telling you I made a calculation 20 years ago that has held for 20 years since. Look at what both families have built in that time, Dr. Liu. Look at what they nearly lost the moment their heirs married each other and reminded the world those old wounds still existed. He leans forward slightly. You and Cassian are not the resolution to old history. You're the reason old history is finally coming apart at the seams. Ask yourself whether that's truly a mercy to either family. Darian stands, jaw tight, refusing to let the man see how deeply the words land. You don't get to decide that for us. No, I don't. Not anymore. Which is precisely why I've spent the last several months making sure other people decide it for you instead. The words settle over Darian like ice water. What does that mean? Jang Han only smiles, thin and unbothered. Ask your husband about the merger his board is voting on next month. Ask him who's funding the opposition. You'll find the answer more interesting than anything I could tell you here. If this twist has you as unsettled as it has Darian, this is a good moment to hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the story is about to move faster than either of them is ready for. Darian leaves the office with his hands shaking, though he'd never admit it out loud. He calls Cassian from the car, voice tighter than he intends. We need to talk. Tonight. It's about the company. And about us. There's a pause on the other end, brief but telling. I was about to call you about the same thing, Cassian says quietly. Come home. We need to compare what we both know. Cassian is waiting when Darian gets home, 2 glasses of untouched whiskey on the table between them, a folder closed and squared at perfect right angles in front of him. The posture of a man bracing for something he's already decided he isn't going to survive gracefully. Darian doesn't sit down right away. He stands in the doorway for a moment, studying him, the way he studies a patient before he said a single word about what's actually wrong. You've already decided something, Darian says. I can see it on you. Sit down first. No. Darian's voice is quiet, but there's a new edge to it, something steadier and more certain than Cassian has heard from him before. You don't get to control the pace of this conversation. Not tonight. Tell me what's in the folder. Cassian looks at him for a long moment, surprised, in a way he tries and fails to hide, at being told no so plainly, so calmly, by the one person in his life who's never had to raise his voice to be obeyed. He slides the folder across the table. Inside, board minutes, shell company filings, a paper trail leading back through 4 layers of holding companies, to a name neither of them is surprised to see anymore. Jang Han has been funding a shareholder revolt for months, Cassian says, using the marriage as the public justification. Instability at the executive level. Concerns about governance. It's all language, all optics, but it's working. The vote is in 3 weeks. If it goes against me, I lose control of the company my grandfather built. And if you end the marriage, the instability narrative collapses. The vote likely goes my way. Cassian's jaw tightens. I've spent the last 2 days trying to find another way. There isn't one that doesn't cost us something. Darian sits now, finally, but he doesn't reach for the whiskey. He reaches for Cassian's hand instead, holding it with the same steady certainty he's held everything else with since the hospital. You were going to sign those divorce papers, weren't you? It isn't a question. Tonight, before I got home. That's what the folder was for. Cassian doesn't answer, which is its own answer. Look at me. Darian's voice doesn't rise, but it doesn't need to. There's a command in it now that wasn't there 6 months ago that Cassian, to his own quiet astonishment, doesn't resist. We are not doing this your way. Not this time. You don't get to decide alone what's best for both of us and hand me the paperwork after the decision's already made. That's not partnership. That's just you being alone with extra steps. I was trying to protect you. I know. Darian's grip tightens slightly. That's the problem. You keep trying to protect me by removing yourself from the equation. Like your love is a liability I need shielding from instead of the one thing actually worth protecting in all of this. Cassian is quiet for a long moment. When he finally speaks, his voice is rougher than usual, stripped down to something almost young. I don't know how to fight this and keep you. I've never had to choose between winning and keeping something at the same time. Then it's a good thing you're not choosing alone anymore. Darian stands, pulling Cassian up with him, closer than the conversation strictly requires. We fight Jang Han together, whatever that costs. And if the board takes the company from you, then we survive that together too. But you do not get to sign anything without me in the room. Are we clear? It isn't a question, not really. And something in Cassian settles at being told so plainly, for once, exactly what's expected of him. We're clear, he says quietly. If you love watching Darian finally step fully into who he really is, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on, because this is only the beginning of him taking the lead. Darian doesn't let go of his hand. Good. Now show me everything you know about the board members Jang Han hasn't gotten to yet. We start there tomorrow morning. Cassian almost smiles, despite everything. You've clearly been thinking about this longer than tonight. I've been thinking about it since Jang Han smiled at me in his office like he already knew how the story ends. Darian's eyes are steady, certain, dangerous in the quiet way real strength usually is. He doesn't know it yet, but he made one mistake tonight. What's that? He assumed you'd face this alone. The 3 weeks before the vote passed differently than either of them expects. Not slower, the way dread usually stretches time, but faster, filled edge to edge with the specific, exhausting work of trying to save something before it's too late. Darian takes charge of it the way he takes charge of everything now, methodical and unshakable. He makes lists. He calls in favors from patients who owe him more than they can ever repay. A shareholder whose father he saved, a board member's wife whose cancer he caught early enough to matter. He doesn't ask Cassian's permission before making these calls. He simply makes them and tells Cassian afterward, and Cassian, more and more, has stopped expecting anything else from him. You didn't have to use your own patience for this, Cassian says one night, watching Darian cross another name off a list with quiet satisfaction. I didn't use them. I asked them. There's a difference, and you know it. Darian doesn't look up. People help the people who once saved their lives. That's not manipulation, Cassian. That's just what happens when you spend a career being the kind of person others can trust. It works mostly slowly, one shareholder at a time. The tide starts to turn back in Cassian's favor. Yamanutais. He requests a private meeting with Cassian alone. No lawyers, no witnesses, just the two of them in a quiet corner of a members' club neither of them particularly likes. Cassian almost refuses. Darian talks him out of refusing. Go, Darian says. Hear whatever he wants to say, but you tell me everything the second you're out of that room. You don't trust me to handle him myself? I trust you completely. Darian straightens his collar for him, an oddly tender gesture in the middle of a war. I don't trust him. There's a difference. Jang Han is exactly as composed as he was in his office, which somehow makes the meeting worse. You've been resourceful, he says, once Cassian is seated. I'll admit, I didn't expect Dr. Liu to be quite so effective. It's rare to find someone who inspires that kind of loyalty. Say what you actually came to say. Very well. Jang Han folds his hands, unhurried. You're going to win this vote. I've recalculated the numbers 3 times, and Dr. Liu's efforts have shifted enough shareholders that the outcome is no longer in question. Congratulations. Then why are we having this conversation? Because winning the vote and winning the war are not the same thing. Jang Han's voice stays perfectly mild, which is somehow more unsettling than if he'd raised it. I have 20 years of documentation on both families. Financial irregularities. Private arrangements neither family would want made public. I've never needed to use any of it, because the silence between your families did my work for me. But if you insist on winning this vote, on staying married, on undoing 20 years of careful balance, I will release every piece of it. To the press, to the tax authorities, to anyone who will listen. And I promise you, Mr. Wei, there's enough there to destroy not just your marriage, but both families completely and permanently. Cassian's blood goes cold, but his face doesn't show it. He's had a lifetime of practice not showing it. You're bluffing. Am I? Jang Han slides a single sheet of paper across the table. A fragment, a preview, enough real detail to prove he isn't. You have until the morning of the vote to decide what matters more to you. Your marriage, or everything both families have spent generations building. I'd think carefully, Mr. Wei. You spent your whole life protecting people who never even knew you were doing it. I wonder if you have one more act of quiet sacrifice left in you. Cassian leaves the club with the paper in his pocket, and for the first time since the hospital, he doesn't go straight home. He drives for hours instead, alone, turning the same impossible choice over and over, arriving nowhere because there is nowhere to arrive, not when both roads end with something he loves in ruins. When he finally does go home, it's past 3 in the morning, and Darian is still awake, waiting exactly where he said he'd be. Tell me, Darian says, before Cassian has even taken off his coat. And for the first time in the entire relationship, Cassian actually does. Every word, every threat, laid bare, without a single wall left standing between them. Cassian tells him everything. The financial irregularities, the private arrangements, the 20 years of documentation Jang Han has apparently been collecting like a man building a weapon he never expected to need and always intended to use eventually. Darian listens without interrupting, the way he listens to a patient's history before deciding on a diagnosis, completely, without flinching, cataloging every detail for later. When Cassian finally finishes, the silence that follows is long enough that he starts to brace for something. He isn't sure what. Anger, maybe. Or worse, agreement that this is finally the moment they should have ended things back at that first dinner table. He wants you to choose between me and everything your family built, Darian says finally. That's the whole plan. He's not actually trying to destroy either family. He's trying to make you do it to yourself, so he never has to be the one holding the knife. I know what he's doing. Knowing doesn't make the choice any easier. There isn't a choice. Darian's voice is steady, certain, final. Not the way he's framed it. He wants you to believe it's your marriage or your family's legacy. It isn't. It's never been that simple. And you know it because you're smarter than the story he's trying to sell you. Darian dash. Let me finish. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to anymore. If he releases those documents, both families survive it. It will be painful. It will be public and humiliating and expensive, and your grandfather will be furious, and my board will probably ask uncomfortable questions for a year. But families survive scandal, Cassian. They don't survive losing each other over a manufactured story an old man told them 20 years ago to keep himself relevant. Cassian stares at him. You'd risk everything the foundation has built. For this, I'd risk everything for you. Darian says it so plainly, so without hesitation, that it lands harder than any declaration wrapped in poetry could have. I didn't marry you to save a hospital wing, Cassian. I stayed married to you because somewhere in the last 6 months, you became the thing I was actually trying to protect. The company, the foundation, those are just buildings. You're not a building. Something in Cassian's chest finally, fully, gives way. I was going to sign the papers that first night, he admits quietly. Before you got home, I convinced myself it was protection. I think some part of me just didn't believe I was allowed to keep something this good without it costing me everything eventually. I know. Darian steps closer, cupping his jaw with a gentleness that doesn't diminish the authority underneath it. That's the last time you make that decision without me. Understood. Understood. Good. Darian's thumb brushes along his cheekbone, unhurried. Now, here's what we're going to do. He lays it out clearly, methodically, called Jang Han's bluff publicly, on their own terms, before the vote, rather than let him control the timing. Get ahead of the story instead of reacting to it. Cassian's grandfather, weak but recovering, insists on being part of the announcement. He has spent 20 years believing a lie about his oldest friend's betrayal, and he wants, more than anything, the chance to finally set it right in public, on his own terms, before he runs out of time to do it all. If you've been waiting for these two to finally fight for each other instead of protecting each other from a distance, this is the moment. And it's a great time to make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on, because the next part is where everything comes to a head. 3 days before the vote, Cassian and his grandfather release a joint statement. Not defensive, not apologetic, simply true. The real history of the factory contracts. Jang Han's role in orchestrating 20 years of manufactured distance between two families who were never actually enemies at all. The story breaks like a storm. And for the first time in this entire fight, Jang Han is the one left scrambling to catch up. The morning of the vote arrives gray and quiet, the kind of stillness that feels less like calm and more like the world holding its breath. The board convenes in the same room where this all began 6 months ago. The same table, the same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a skyline that has watched 3 generations of Wei men make decisions that outlasted them. This time, Cassian doesn't walk in alone. Darian is beside him, not as a spouse making a symbolic appearance, but as himself, introduced at Cassian's insistence, not as Dr. Liu, the chairman's husband, but as Dr. Darian Liu, acting advisor to the Liu Foundation's board, present because the outcome of this vote affects both families' futures now, inseparably. The public statement has already done most of the work. Jang Han's name is now attached, publicly and undeniably, to 20 years of manufactured hostility between two respected families. In the world Cassian and Darian both operate in, nothing is less forgivable than being caught manipulating people for decades and calling it strategy. Still, the vote itself is not a formality. Several board members remain unconvinced, uneasy, more comfortable with the old story than the complicated truth. It's Cassian's grandfather, wielding against his doctor's mild objections, who speaks last, before the vote is called. I have sat on this board longer than most of you have been alive, he says, voice thin but unwavering. I built relationships on the assumption that my oldest friend was also my worst enemy, and I let that assumption cost my family a friendship, a partnership, and 20 years I will never get back. He looks deliberately at Cassian and Darian standing together. My grandson found something I never let myself have the courage to fight for. Not because he searched for it, but because he stopped running from it the moment it found him. I have very little time left to make up for the mistakes 20 years of pride cost this family. I am asking you, as the man who built this company, And as a man who has finally learned better, vote for the future he's building, not the fear I taught him to protect it with. The vote, when it finally comes, isn't close. Cassian keeps the company. Not because of the statement alone, not because of Darian's careful shareholder outreach alone, but because of both, together, the same way everything that's worked in the last 6 months has worked. Neither of them carrying it alone. Afterward, in the quiet of the elevator down, Cassian finally allows himself to exhale. We did it. You did it. Darian leans against the elevator wall, watching him with something unmistakably proud. I just made a few phone calls and refused to let you sign anything stupid. That's not nothing. No. Darian's voice softens. It's not. Cassian steps closer, framing Darian's face in both hands now. Something in his eyes finally, completely unguarded. I owe you everything. The company. My grandfather's peace. Whatever's left of me that still knows how to feel something without controlling it. You don't owe me anything. Darian's hands find his waist, steady and sure. I didn't do any of this so you'd owe me. I did it because somewhere in the last 6 months, keeping you became the only outcome I was willing to accept. The elevator doors open onto the lobby, and neither of them moves to step out. If watching them finally, fully win this fight together felt as good to you as it did to me, don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications, because next, we finally get to see what happens when two men who fought this hard for each other get to simply be happy. Jang Han, 3 floors up in a different building entirely, watches the news alert scroll across his phone in silence. He doesn't call anyone. There's no one left to call. For the first time in 20 years, the story he built has finally, completely, come apart, and there is no version of the ending he can quietly orchestrate his way back into. He sets the phone down, and for a long moment, simply sits with the particular stillness of a man who has just lost the only thing he ever actually built. The city rains that night, the same soft, steady rain from the very beginning, the kind that once fell against penthouse windows over unsigned divorce papers, now falling over something entirely different. Cassian's grandfather is recovering well. The board has settled. Jang Han's name has quietly, thoroughly, become unwelcome in every room that once respected him. The crisis that consumed 6 months of both their lives has finally, fully ended. And for the first time since the contract was signed, neither of them has anywhere urgent to be. They don't go out to celebrate. They don't need to. Darian cooks, badly, cheerfully, a dish his mother used to make that he hasn't attempted in years, filling the penthouse with the smell of burnt garlic and something underneath it that might, with enough patience, become dinner. Cassian watches from the doorway, arms crossed, something unguarded and helplessly fond written all over his face. You're ruining that. I'm improving it. There's a difference. Darian doesn't look up, though the corner of his mouth curves. Come stir this before it burns completely. Your hands are steadier than mine right now. Cassian crosses the kitchen without argument. A small thing, 6 months ago, unthinkable. Now simply what happens when Darian asks. He takes the spoon, their hands overlapping briefly at the handle, and something about the domesticity of it, the rain outside, the ruined dinner, the quiet certainty that there's no contract left dictating any of this, only choice, undoes something in his chest completely. Marry me, Cassian says. Darian actually laughs, startled. We're already married. Not like this. Cassian sets the spoon down, turning to face him fully. We got married because 2 families needed saving and neither of us had a choice. I'm asking now because I do have a choice, and there is nothing in this world I want more than to keep choosing you every single day for reasons that have nothing to do with contracts or boards or anyone's legacy but ours. Darian goes quiet, something bright and overwhelmed moving behind his eyes. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Darian crosses the space between them, cupping Cassian's jaw the way he has 100 times now, except this time there's nothing careful or measured about it. Just want, plain and unhidden. Yes, he says against his mouth, before kissing him properly, thoroughly, the ruined dinner forgotten completely behind them. Obviously, yes. If this is the ending you've been hoping for since episode 1, let me know in the comments. And if you want to see how their story truly closes, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because the final part of this story is coming very soon. Later, tangled together on the couch, rain still falling soft against the windows, Darian traces idle patterns against Cassian's chest, unhurried, entirely at ease in a way neither of them ever thought they'd be allowed. "Do you remember," Darian murmurs, "that first night? The transaction with a witness list. Vividly. You were insufferable. I was honest." A soft laugh against his skin. "I just didn't know yet how wrong I was about the rest of it." Cassian presses a kiss to the crown of his head, quiet and certain. "Neither did I." Outside, the storm finally begins to clear, the first break of moonlight cutting through clouds that have hung over the city for what feels like months. Neither of them notices right away. They're too busy, finally, simply being happy. No contract, no audience, no performance left to give. Just two men who were never supposed to need anyone, choosing, completely and permanently, to need each other anyway. Months later, on a quiet evening not so different from the one that started all of this, Cassian finds the folder again. The original one, the divorce agreement neither of them ever signed, forgotten at the bottom of a drawer in his study. He almost throws it away without opening it. Then, on some impulse he doesn't fully examine, he brings it to Darian instead, setting it on the table between them exactly the way he did that first, almost final night. Darian looks at it for a long moment, recognizes it instantly. "You kept this. I forgot I still had it, if I'm honest." Cassian sits across from him, the same seats, the same table, the rain outside soft against the glass, an echo of that night, deliberate or not, neither of them says. "I keep thinking about who I was, sitting here, ready to sign it. Convinced I was protecting you by disappearing from your life as cleanly as I'd entered it. I remember." Darian's voice is gentle, without judgment. "I asked you if it was really what you wanted, or just another way of protecting me. You already knew the answer." "I did." Darian reaches across the table, not for the papers, but for Cassian's hand. "I just needed you to find it yourself. I couldn't hand you that kind of certainty. You had to earn your way back to trusting that you were allowed to keep something good without it costing you everything eventually, as it always has, indifferent to two men who once believed love was something that only made them weaker, more exposed, easier to lose everything through. They know better now. They have for months. There's a version of this story where the strongest alpha is the one who needs nobody, untouchable, unshaken, alone at the top of an empire he built entirely by himself. That was never actually the strongest version. It was only the loneliest one. The version that matters, the one that took two proud, guarded, thoroughly unwilling men and slowly, patiently, undid every wall either of them had ever built, is this one. The one where a contract written to save two companies became, instead, the beginning of the only thing either of them ever actually needed saving from, the belief that they had to survive everything alone. Cassian Wei spent 30 years being told that strength meant needing no one. He learned, in the end, that the strongest thing he ever did was let someone stay. This has been the Alpha Contract. Thank you for spending these 3 episodes with Cassian and Darian, for rooting for them through every wall, every threat, every moment they almost let fear win instead of each other. If their story moved you even half as much as it moved me writing it, please subscribe and turn on notifications, because more stories like this one are coming to Nightfall BL Stories very soon. Until then, thank you for staying until the very end.